Hello, everyone.
Non-unionized. That's right.
I want to welcome you. I'm Rachel Lee, and I'm the director of the Center for the Study of Women, and I don't normally sound this sexy, but this is the flu, getting over the flu. I'm delighted to welcome you to Edible Feminisms on Discard, Waste, and Metabolism. And we have so many co-sponsors. I just want to begin by thanking all of them because a lot of effort went into this. And I'd like to thank the Luskin Endowment for Thought Leadership, the Division of Humanities, the Luskin School of Public Affairs, the Food Studies Graduate Certificate Program, the Institute for Research on Labor and Employment, the Institute of American Cultures, the Iris Cantor UCLA Women's Health Center, the Asian American Studies Center, the Department of African American Studies, the Department of History, the Department of Asian American Studies, the Department of Gender Studies, the Institute for Society and Genetics, and the Office of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. So with that long list, you can tell how many people thought of this as an extremely worthy project. And that is, of course, due to our wonderful co-planners for the conference, who I will introduce in a moment. The Center for the Study of Women, or CSW, was the first research unit of its kind in the UC system. We publish original research on women, gender, and sexuality. We offer awards and grants to faculty, students, and independent scholars, and we work to improve campus climate for people of all genders. Despite our limited resources, we are proud to continue offering events like this free of charge to the public. But if you are interested in supporting our programs or donating to the center, please speak to a CSW staff member, and they'll be at the registration table, but they're in the back of the room right now too. So Edible Feminisms has been 2 years in the making. Last year, we were fortunate enough to receive generous funding from the Division of Social Sciences and the Healthy Campus Initiative to launch our food studies program, which included the lecture series, Food, Feminism, and the Way We Eat. We were also able to hire 2 fantastic adjunct assistant professors, Sarah Tracy and Rachel Vaughn, who curated today's event and the Edible Feminisms project, which they'll tell you about more shortly. Before we get started, I'd like to announce 2 other events that CSW will be holding in the next month. On February 13th, Sarah Ahmed, author of Queer Phenomenology on Being Included and Other Acclaimed Works, is going to give us a talk titled Complaint as Diversity Work, based on her experiences helping students and colleagues deal with sexual harassment and misconduct at the university. So again, that's February 13th, and we have more information about it at the table where you registered. On March 1st and 2nd, we are holding our annual Thinking Gender Graduate Student Conference. It's the 28th year that we're holding this conference, and the theme is pre-existing conditions this year. The conference will feature a keynote speaker, Terry Conley of the Department of Psychology at the University of Michigan. And again, there's more information about that at our registration table. So I also want to thank our wonderful staff who make everything possible here at CSW, including my seeming calm right now. So Christina Magpayo-Naiden, Alexandra Apollini, and Melissa Chimero, thank you so much for all that you do for the center. And I also want to offer a huge congratulations to Dr. Sarah Tracy and Rachel Vaughn for organizing this panel and project. Their work is bringing new awareness to our campus on the connections between food and gender, food and discard, and is initiating new conversations about how feminist perspectives can help to address pressing problems around eating, health, and sustainability. I hope you'll join us after the panel for the reception, which will be outside, where you registered to take the opportunity, to take the opportunity to congratulate Dr. Tracy and Dr. Vaughn yourselves. And with that reminder of discard, I will now step away from the podium, but I'd like to first welcome Dr. Sarah Tracy and Rachel Vaughn here, who will introduce our panelists.
Hello, everyone. My name is Sarah Tracy, and I am thrilled to see all of you here today. My colleague, Dr. Rachel Vaughn, and I came to UCLA back in July 2016 to think about eating. And we realized that was terribly convenient because we both spend a ridiculous amount of time thinking about eating already. So it was nice to be employed for that talent. I was going to make a joke about if I had $1 for every time in the last 2 years Rachel has mentioned mini tarts to me, I would not need this job. But I thought that was a cheap shot. But we express our love through carbs. So seriously, though, we arrived to an embarrassment of riches here at UCLA. There is incredible research being done right on this campus into the health effects of diet and stress, environmental toxins, the gut microbiome, food insecurity, and into the social determinants of health, understood more broadly. And we bring our own research and teaching expertise to a campus that's already ripe with energy and excitement around the Healthy Campus Initiative, which is unique in the country, the new food studies minor, and ambitions for a graduate program in food studies as well, and a nationally unique food pantry model, and one of the healthiest, most exceptional campus meal hall experiences I've ever witnessed in B-Plate. Any B-Plate diehards? Perfect. It's crazy. So I want to explain in very, very simple terms what Rachel and I envisioned with this event that we've called Edible Feminisms, because I was congratulating myself on being super clever with this title. And when the amazing poster was finalized last month, I sent it to my family who are way up north in cold Canada to give them some practical, tangible evidence of what I've been spending my time doing here in Southern California. And they were, to a person, thrilled. They're so excited, like, Sarah, we're so happy for you, well done. We have no idea what you mean. How do you eat a feminism? Why is there more than one? What does discard and waste have to do with metabolism? Please explain. So that's what I'm going to do. And then Rachel's going to pick up the thread and introduce our amazing panelists today. And we're going to be brief. First, what do discard and waste have to do with metabolism? I spent my PhD dissertation research in Toronto thinking about what things connected contemporary American food culture with the production of science, with facts, with data about claims to the nature of how things work in the world. And in these meanderings, I became intrigued with the career of a Michelin-starred Korean-American chef named David Chang, the founder of the Momofuku restaurant empire. Perhaps some of you have heard of him. And he's done a lot of interesting things. But one of them was back in 2015, he participated in the World Bank's public dialogue on how top chefs could help world leaders repurpose food waste in order to address global food insecurity. How were top chefs going to do this, you ask? By fermenting what was normally thrown out. In fermentation technologies, they claimed what was ugly, old, or funky could be made delicious, desirable to eat, and significantly more valuable. And I realized that all around me, people working on food were decrying food waste and reinvesting symbolically, if in no other way, in the potential for science to turn ick into yum. The latent or waiting potential of discarded foods had become a preoccupation of everyone from writers for Huffington Post to the Food and Agricultural Association. And since then, food commentators have become known for parsing things like insects, the sustainable protein, lab-grown, animal and cruelty-free meat, things like ugly veg, bone broth, offal. And I realized that I was working in a moment in which the celebration of the undervalued, of the leftover, and the reduction of consumer food waste had become as vital to the future of ending global hunger than just increasing food production. So the cast-off was being recast through scientific research into the metabolics of taste as a way to expand the boundaries of what was considered edible. At the same time, the under-realized value lurking inside our own bodies was being reassessed. The gastrointestinal tract, or that previously underrated internal plumbing we're all equipped with, was reinvented as the gut brain, or the enteroendocrine system, a sophisticated agent in our neurological messaging and in our immune system, or our defense against disease. Now, because of, for example, HuffPost coverage, non-specialists can read about how there are even taste receptors in the testicles. So taste is not only about taste anymore. The same sites being so prioritized for health, for life-saving interventions at the medical and policy levels, were the same sites in our bodies being celebrated as the next frontier of gastronomy, the stuff of culinary innovation and artistic expression. So Rachel is a scholar of the ways that the edible and the wasted cross paths. And I have made myself a scholar of those places where the science of pleasure bump up against and become indistinguishable from the science of health. And we realized that we were studying different sides of the same coin.
So, what does feminism have to do with eatability? Tonight's stellar panel of award-winning authors and activists was inspired by Dr. Wazana Tompkins' work, 2012 book, Racial Indigestion. As historians of food waste, science, and technology, Sarah and I have envisioned the panel as the first in a series of activities that explore our theme, including a workshop and special issue of NYU's journal Culture and Society, due out next fall. And thank you to the Institute for Society and Genetics artist in resident, Amisha Gadani, for her incredible poster designs, to our amazing staff at CSW and faculty, to the brilliant writers who are here with us, and to editor Amy Bentley, who joins us here also in LA, for supporting us in this multifaceted endeavor, Edible Feminisms. The scholars working on the special issue are doing all different kinds of analyses, sociological, anthropological, historical, literary, but not just of foods, as much as we love avocados and tacos and boba tea, but of eating. And this is where we're building on Kyla's book, in which she challenged the food-interested world to look beyond food itself, to think about how our ideas about ingestion and edibility, or what's good to eat, to look hard at what those ideas and practices of eating reveal about the political beliefs and structures that organize us as people moving around this world we share. I come to this co-organized stage not just as a scholar of the discarded, the wasted, the presumed dead, done over inedible, filthy, or supposedly valueless, but also as gender studies faculty and as founding member of a food justice nonprofit. I have thought long and hard about how and if food becomes a vehicle for justice, through which we might ask tough, sometimes uncomfortable but necessary questions. How are we accountable? To ourselves, to each other, to our communities? Who gets a spot at the table? And how? Whose voices are most frequently heard? Who's ignored? Whose wellness is prioritized? What do more sustainable communities even look like anyway? And is that always the same as more just communities? We are living in days in which feminism itself is a loaded term, still. What much mainstream and reactionary coverage of movements like Black Lives Matter, Me Too, and Time's Up assumes is that such movements are trying to make, for example, Black people more important than everyone else, or women more important than men, or they reflect assumptions that such movements are only about calling out or tearing down, and sometimes social change involves critique, to be sure. As a kindred community food spirit I know once said, it's real tough, but no lotus without mud. These movements are about building up, honoring experiences of people who have been institutionally dismissed. Cultural critic Bell Hooks lyrically wrote, quote, "Visionary feminism is a wise and loving politic. The soul of our politics is the commitment to ending domination." We don't claim to know all the burdens raised by these diverse movements or generational experiences. We know some. In pluralizing feminisms tonight, we acknowledge critique and struggle, even amongst movements, which can be difficult and generative. This panel showcases organizations that revalue, that use food, waste, and cultural affirmation as vehicles to uplift their communities and constituencies in a manner that is powerfully critical, yet positive and inclusive. They build and dismantle. Tonight's event is dedicated to the work of anti-racism, anti-sexism, classism, colonialism, by pondering ways in which food and feminisms might inform each other. As food critic Corsha Wilson wrote just last month, quote, "We rely on the idea that food brings us together, transcending racial and gender lines to unify us in a shared love of cuisine. And I wish it were that simple. Food is just as susceptible to the same oppressive power structures that impact every other part of our lives, and we have to dismantle them." In our contemporary moment, women globally produce well over half the world's food, yet face sharp hunger trends and gender-based barriers to economic resources like land, tools, financing. As we speak, thousands of assault and harassment cases filed by migrant and undocumented farm worker women await legal action at the height of the Me Too movement, and in spite of their crucial skills sustaining U.S. agriculture. Since October, Coalition of Immokalee Workers runs the Time's Up Wendy's campaign, calling for harvests without violence for farm workers. In spite of cultural traditions and stereotypes, that unpaid food work falls frequently to women, and more importantly, that work is often inspired by women's immense culinary contributions. In the US, women formally head less than 20% of restaurant kitchens, and less than 5% within elite restaurant groups. At the formal levels of culinary arts, there are strides in equitable acknowledgement of the work long accomplished by women and minorities in the culinary world, and yet still 80%. We raise these examples tonight to inspire more work that challenges the indigestibility of patriarchy. Tonight we learn from panelists thinking critically about food and eating as an entry point into broader stakes. We use food to show how capital markets put a value on us all, on our skills, our talents, on the value that can be generated from animals, plants, and microbes. That market economy has created worlds of products that reflect the value hierarchies of patriarchy, white supremacy, and heteronormativity. And our goal tonight is to recognize and promote work that undoes this, work that teaches other models for nourishing our bodies and communities, ideas that create value for people beyond dollars and cents or profit margins. And now it is my great honor and pleasure to introduce Tanya Fields, is the founder of the Black Project, a community organizer, public speaker, popular social media personality, fostering leadership and health among Black women in the Bronx. Also, Tiny, AKA Lisa Gray-Garcia, is the co-founder of Poor Magazine, Poor News Network, and the Homefulness Project, a landless people's self-determined land liberation movement, and a prolific writer and editor. Rick Nahmias, who founded Food Forward here in LA, redistributing wasted produce across the city and informing his work on the LA Food Policy Council Board and the steering committee for the LA County Food Recovery Initiative. And our scholarly muse for this evening, Kyla Wazana Tompkins of Pomona College, with razor-fine criticism, irreverence, and humor, has challenged food and American studies scholars to keep the acrid bite of feminism, keep the acrid bite of racism, sexism, and homophobia on our tongues as we craft our stories about what American is and what it can be. Guiding us through our discussion is the work of a very widely recognized scholar of American food culture and science, MIT anthropologist Heather Paxson. Dr. Paxson has been influential in bridging the groups of scholars who study science and those who study food. Often those people are different, and this week we hope with the special issue and with today's event they collide. Specifically, Dr. Paxson's work has traced how people craft moral sensibilities through everyday practices, especially those to do with the family and the food, and her most recent book, The Life of Cheese, reflected some of the key themes mentioned today, like what's edible, what's gross, what's cast away, how can fermenting something on a small scale provide a way for people to build a community that helps them be healthier and more sustainable. We're going to ask our panelists now to tell their stories and to speak to the strengths and weaknesses of our past options for nourishing more equitable communities. And to do that, I first ask you to welcome Dr. Paxson to the stage.
Well, thank you so much for that introduction. I'm thrilled to be here. This is a really exciting gathering and event, and I'm going to move right to it so we can hear from our panelists. The first question will ask you guys to introduce yourselves and your work. So we're going to take it one at a time. And then after that, I think we'll see if we can pose questions that can get you guys talking to each other, okay? And we won't just go in lockstep. Does that sound good? But we'll start with that. Okay. So this is a panel about work, activist work as well as scholarly work that is concerned with eating and with equity at the same time. We hear a lot about ethical consumerism, right? The promise that if you buy local, organic, fair this, whatever, the world will suddenly be a better place. But we know, we know food inequity is more complicated than that. That's our starting point. So as you introduce yourselves in your work, as you tell us the story of how you came to do what it is that you do, maybe you could reflect through that about how that work moves us beyond the platitudes of voting with your fork. You want to start us off, Tanya?
Not really, but okay.
Thank you.
I figured that was coming, so I was sitting right here. How did I come to this work? Okay, I'm gonna ask y'all to do something interactive. Sorry. If you can, I want you to move out of your seat. Just move out of your seat into a space where you got a little space. And if you can't, that's okay. If you're sitting in, you're gonna have to move all the way out. I know, like, ma'am, it's 4 o'clock in the evening, what are you doing? It's not yoga though, so I'm not gonna be cliche. It's gonna be a little more movement than that. This is gonna require you to move. Now what I'm gonna ask you to do is pop a squat where you are. Sit down on the floor. Yes, I know. She's crazy, this lady. I want you to either sit lotus style or sit with your knees towards your chest, either one. Now, without using the chair, without using any assistance, I want you to grab the sides of your shoes and pretend that they are bootstraps. And now I want you to pull yourself up by them. What's wrong with y'all? Pull yourself up by your bootstraps. You cannot use anything to help you. You are just going to use gravity and your own physical strength and determination. She's a physical anomaly, and even she had to sort of rock and get herself up off her feet. But the vast majority of you cannot do it. You can go back and sit down in your seat. It is almost physically impossible. So who is the sadist that came up with this idea that you could pull yourself up by your bootstraps? To me, and it was something that I heard a lot as a young black mother, right? I have 6 children. I know, and I still managed to get on a plane to come here. It's crazy. I have 6 children, ages 15 to 2. I'm 37 years old. I ended up in the Bronx in 2005, I believe. 2004, 2003. My daughter was 2 years old. I was 22 years old. I was still in school. I moved to one of the poorest congressional districts in the country. I still live there 16 years later. 15 years later, my daughter's 15. She was 3 months old when we moved in. And this was rhetoric that I heard a lot as a young mother who was working full-time, doing any variety of things, a receptionist, slanging coffee at Starbucks, anything you could think of, I was doing it, as well as going to school full-time in the CUNY system. That's a city university in New York, right? And people were constantly saying, pull yourself up by your bootstraps. You're gonna be okay, as long as you stick it out and pull yourself up by your bootstraps, right? That was people's answer to when I started to recognize that there might have been some sort of systemic and institutional barriers that were keeping me from being as successful as I wanted to be, and that were reflecting some serious health issues in both myself and my daughter. Here was someone who was pretty active. At any given time, I was on my feet anywhere from 8 to 12 hours a day. I was dragging a stroller up the New York City subways, and yet my waistline was increasing. By the time my second daughter was born, when I was 24 years old, almost from birth, she was exhibiting issues of asthma and hospitalized by the time she was 3 months old because she had respiratory issues. She's now 13. Those respiratory issues have not ended. We end up hospitalized at least twice a year. And we're in the emergency room at least 3 times more than that. And she's on a nebulizer at home probably all of the time. And here people were telling me that I just need to pull myself up by my bootstraps. So I was like, you know what, F this. I'm gonna really try to see if I can do this, because something about this doesn't make sense. And when I physically tried to pull myself up by my bootstraps, I realized I'm not crazy. You cannot do this. It is a physical anomaly to do so. Of all of the people in this room, 1, maybe 2 people were able to do it. And if you think about it, not to put them on the spot to be ableist as sizes, it was a young, thin, white woman. So then we think about what's entailed in that, the able-bodiedness that comes with that. And so here we are telling a group of people who live in one of the poorest congressional districts in the community, who are suffering under some serious, serious issues, who work harder than anybody else I know, even if they're not gainfully employed, to pull themselves up by their bootstraps. It is like a very warped joke. And so at some point, that, along with all of the things happening in the periphery, I was coming to the realization that the majority of my adulthood at this point, George Bush was going to be president, and that just seemed so tragic to me. we were, and now look at the administration, I'm kind of like, please, George Bush, come back. You know, it's serious when the administration we have now makes George Bush seem sane, right? And so, along with invading Afghanistan, working in the corporate sector where I was being penalized, right? This thing about sort of passive racism and passive sexism, it's like that euphemism about obscenity. I may not be able to define it, but I damn sure know it when I see it. And so that was happening to me in the corporate sector. And so I started to have some real I was starting to develop this idea around really seeing the nuances and the intersections in feminism. I learned that the kind of feminism that I thought that I was a part of, I was not a part of. There's a different kind of feminism that was happening in corporate America, and it did not include young, black, low-income mothers. I was starting to learn in the corporate sector that white women in many ways could be just as violent and the biggest arbiters of white supremacy than, you know, the white man. And I was trying to grapple with all of those things at the same time. I happened to be taking my daughter to enrolling her to school. She's about 4 years old this time. I decided that I didn't really know my community because I was one of those people who, like many low-income people, put her head down, went to school, went to work, came home. That was it. I decided to take a different way home. Instead, I walked up Intervale, and as I walked past this giant storefront, it's got this big sign that says Madres en Movimiento. My Spanish is not that great, but I was like, oh, mothers in movement. I'm currently moving. I'm a mother. Feel like the sign's talking to me. And as I'm standing there looking at this sign, all of a sudden, this Afro-Latina woman, Wanda, who's physically imposing, comes to the door and says, why are you standing here? And I felt like I better have an answer. And I was like, I don't know. And so she invited me in. And she asked me how long I had been living in the community. She asked me all of the things that I thought were wrong with the community. I ran off a laundry list of things, and then she looked me right in my eye and she said, so what's your plan to do something about it? And she wasn't mocking me and she wasn't being condescending. She seemed like she had some answers. And I was like, I don't know. And she was like, well, I got some good news and some bad news. Good news is that there are folks who are working on these things. You are not crazy. All of the things that you are illustrating is not just, they're not happening to you because you are deficient, because you are a black woman, or because you are low income, or because you are an unmarried mother. So the bad news is that your kids are probably going to be grown by the time we see any kind of incremental change. And now here I am, my daughter's going on 15, and we're just starting to see some of those incremental changes. And so I worked with Mothers on the Move. We shut down NYAFCO, New York Organic Fertilizer Company, which on the face of it sounds great, right? Organic fertilizer company. No, this was a company that was taking 70-something% of the municipal waste in New York City. New York City has something like between 8 to 11 million people in it. And we were taking 70% of its waste through our community. My community literally smelled like shit every day of the week. And then the trucks, when they were coming in with this sludge, right around the corner was an actual municipal treatment facility. So we took them to court, we got it shut down, and then after that it was kind of like, now what? And I knew the work that I wanted to do wasn't just about continuing to be reactionary. And that's important. We need people on the front line who are being reactionary, but who are we when we take the trauma away? Who are we when we stop seeing ourselves as a group of people that something has been done to? Who are we with our best possible selves? And so I knew that the work that I wanted to do while working in lockstep with those who were doing organizing work, who were tearing shit down, was to do the work of visioning, was to do the work of joy, was to do the work of building something. And I knew that black women and children had to be at the head of that. Because when we think about a capitalist system, let's be real honest here. This capitalist system, all of the great amenities that we see in this room, all of these great Ivy Leagues that folks get to participate in, except folks who come from my community the majority of the time, are built on the exploited and stolen labor of black women and immigrant women. And so if we're gonna create a movement, then we damn sure better be at the front of it. And so I wanted to create something in my community that was going to start with and end with black women and children. Because if we're not having a conversation about the feminization of poverty, gendered poverty, then we're not having a conversation. At least you ain't having one with me. And so I started the Black Project. It was about creating economic development opportunities for women and children, particularly women of children of color, particularly black women and children, and using the local and good food movement as the catalyst for that. Because again, as someone who's sort of a foodie and had gone to culinary school, I was in these spaces where white men were leading the charge, but everything they had learned about food, they had learned from my big grandma. When we think about waste, right, it's so interesting when we talk about that. I'm sitting here going, well, I grew up in a community that did hog head cheese. You know what it's like to open a pot and there's like a literal hog head in that pot as a child? It's some traumatic stuff right there. To go into my community now, in this community of primarily Puerto Rican, Black, immigrant folks from South America, and you can go buy a whole goat's head of Western beef. Like straight up, you're like, oh, here's the lamb, here's the sausage, oh, goat head, great. Because those foodways, those traditional foodways are still there. And so I wanted to make sure that we were, one, reclaiming our narrative, because we see many times that, you know, there's a West African euphemism that says, so long as I'm paraphrasing here and it's not as eloquent as it is, but it says, the hunters will continue to write history so long as they are the victors. Who's gonna tell the story of the lions? And so I wanted to make sure that we were telling our stories. And then on top of telling our stories, in a capitalist system, it's not enough just to tell your story. You gotta get your coins for your story. I tell all the women in my community, girl, get your coin, get your coin. And so I wanted to make sure that women and children in my community were getting their coins. So we started a farm on Simpson Street after a 10-year campaign. We turned a 5,400 square foot lot into a urban farm, and I'm very intentional about not calling it a community garden. It is an urban farm. That is the model. We repurposed a used school bus and just received money from Bank of America to purchase a new school bus to turn that into the South Bronx Mobile Market, which is a clean energy vehicle. It runs on used vegetable oil. So in the summertime, it might smell like French fries, but we're serving arugula. Every year we do the Not Just Talk, which is very similar to TED Talks. I was invited to a TED Talk called TEDx Manhattan, and then unceremoniously uninvited when the woman who was convening it was told that I would say the wrong thing, meaning I'd talk about racism and sexism in the food system. And so I decided then that I would no longer be interested in trying to interject myself into spaces that were intentionally created to marginalize people like me. So I started Tanya Talks. I'm like Ted's sassy black cousin. And so every year we do Not Just Talks. And for the last 2 years, the theme has been Black Mama Magic, about creating safe spaces for black mothers to talk about what it means to try to raise fully liberated, conscientious citizens of the world in a community that is not even thinly veiled in trying to dispose of us and maim us and kill us and brutalize us. And where our reproductive organs, specifically as black women, are constantly, have been and constantly continue to be under attack. And then I also do Mama Tanya's Kitchen, which is a YouTube cooking show that was born out of my cooking demos called Fast Food in a Snap, which is how do we create sort of gourmet style meals on a SNAP budget. My tagline is don't be basic. So I wanted to make sure that I came to the community understanding that many of the people who were in this community were not ignorant of how to cook food, that many of them had the skills to do so. But there were real barriers like access, and that the onus of them. In New York City, we don't have food deserts. We have what I like to call food apartheid. And I think maybe Hank Herrera came up with that term first, food apartheid, which is if you're willing to get on a train with your kids or take a cab down to the Upper West Side or go to Park Slope or hustle somebody who has a Park Slope food co-op membership, you can get decent food. But if you're using food stamps to do that, where people only get about $1.45 per person per meal, you're still gonna be operating a deficit. In our community, we call EBT, Eat Better Today. On average, it only covers about 2 weeks of a month's worth of food. At the last last 2 weeks, people are using food pantries or just straight up innovativeness to try to figure out how they're gonna feed their families. Thank you.
Wow. So you guys really curated quite a different group here. This is great. So thanks for having me. I come to my work and my world with a dichotomy where on one side I'm a white male, and I know it, and I know that allows me privilege and entry into certain places. On the other side, I'm a queer Jew, and it has kept me with one foot in outsiderness and one foot in insidedness. And in a life before Food Forward, I was a documentary photographer, and I studied communities on the margins. I photographed, interviewed, and created projects that celebrated the us and them equation. And I've always found for myself personally drawn to that, that split in myself, where there is no question that because of my skin and my gender that I'm able to walk through certain doors that other people aren't, while at the same time parts of me are completely relegated, hated, and discarded. And my work as a photographer focused on California communities for the most part. First it was migrant farm workers and their stories of the human cost of feeding the country that really drew me in. And then secondly, it was stories of religion on the margins. It was a transgender gospel choir. It was women in prison who were finding faith through interfaith and Native American traditions. It was a halfway house for recovering Jewish addicts. And it was reflecting how people on the margins find community faith and the sacred. Around the same time, the Obama campaign was happening, and I was a proponent and volunteer of his and the Prop 8 campaign, which those of you who are from LA know, or California, as the marriage equality proposition, which was unfortunately overturned gay marriage within the state, of which my marriage was nullified. And again, picking up on Tanya's lead of where we were activated around the Bush years, I couldn't spend another 4 years, even 2 years, with the bitterness of what George Bush left in my mouth. I had to do something that was positive. And I was also a trained cook, and I found food for me post 9/11 was where I found solace and community and a place of abundance and joy. And so I decided, through living out here in the San Fernando Valley, as I walked my neighborhood and walked my dog, who was growing older and older, and those walks were growing slower and slower, that I was seeing fruit on trees that was not going to use. And so basically I got the idea that if I and volunteers could take that fruit and be the agents of change and take that abundance and move it to a place of scarcity, which ironically at the time, and even more so now, was just a few blocks from where we were, that we ourselves, in a very simple action, which dates back thousands of years to gleaning biblically, could be change makers that were using food as a political statement. And thus Food Forward was born in 2009. It was the right idea at the right time, and by the end of the first year we had about 400 or 500 volunteers who were gleaning trees virtually every weekend in every corner of the city. And we had about a total of about 100,000 pounds of fresh citrus, mostly, that was being repurposed from gardens and yards to people in need. The second year brought in 250,000 pounds of produce. In the third and fourth years, we became a formal nonprofit, and we added a farmers market recovery program, which now is at 24 markets in LA County and Ventura County. And soon after that, we added wholesale recovery, and we grew from just a few types of varieties of produce to over 200 types of produce. And we now stand today as an organization that last year collected over 18 million pounds of fresh produce that would otherwise have been wasted, and delivered that completely free of charge to over 300 agencies across 8 counties. There is a wonderful balance that I've been fortunate enough to work with at Food Forward, which is the impact of those pounds, which you can't deny, especially when it's fresh, uncut produce going to people who are otherwise depending on pantry staples. And this is, you know, the brass ring of food for them is the arugula, is the, you know, organic pineapple, is avocados from beautiful farms in San Diego. But it's also the civic engagement, which I've been fortunate enough to oversee with Food Forward, and the fact that we're doing, I think, around 200 volunteer-powered events every month all over 2 counties. And what that has done to build a community that can, I can't say there is no socioeconomic and there is no gender and there is no racial biases within it, but food is the common denominator. And that is the topic by which we convene and the currency by which we communicate and we celebrate and we make change.
I am a poverty scholar. That houseless mama, that houseless daughter. I am a poverty scholar. All the people you don't want to see, never want to be, look away from me. What you gonna do, arrest me? I'm in your city. I am a poverty scholar, and I rock my jailhouse attire because me and my po mama did the poverty crime of trying to stay alive in this holler. I am a poverty scholar, the melanin challenged daughter of a strong Afro-Boricua mama for without whom there would be no me, a mama soltera and a welfare queen. So that's what we call our slam bio at the Poets Project of Poor Magazine. I'm a proud member of the Welfare Queens, that's small W, capital Q, and I got so much medicine from you today, thank you. I feel honored to be on this panel with you both, but I will say this. When I walked onto this stolen Tongva land, okay, the first thing that struck me is this is food injustice right here. I just want to say that. Food injustice. And so first off and foremost, because I identify as Taino and my mama is indigenous side, dad was straight colonizer pilgrim. I wrestle with that all the time. If we could just take a moment of silence for the first folks who were had the genocide of colonization and another type of gentrification, the Tongva people. And also for all of the black and brown and poor people who have died on these streets because of no access to a roof. We are houseless or unhoused or homeless. That don't mean we a tribe. We are humans who just don't happen to have access to the money that it costs to get oneself a roof, because private property ownership is valued more than humans. So for our unhoused brothers and sisters right now who are living food injustice, and I don't even know if we can use the word security, if we do get our SSI checks or our EBT happens to stretch, maybe, for them a moment of silence, please, at the very minimum. So there aren't that many things, thank you, that this poverty scholar can teach you, not more or not less than any of the other poverty scholars around you, beside you, right next to you, if you walk outside this gilded cage called UCLA. I walked on the streets, me and my mama were houseless here. You know I'm a hustler, so I got product. Because Poor Magazine is in fact Po, folks. There ain't no money in that. We don't make money helping ourselves and each other. So we poor people working together to try to survive. Some people talk about the concept of resilience. I think we wake up every day and we put on our clothes and we maybe get our bootstraps if we have them or they're not broken, and we get up and we take care of our babies and our elders. So my story is Mama and me were in this town, East LA, Compton, Inglewood, East Hollywood, or wherever we could happen to support or survive. Mama was a low-income mama, making it by any means necessary. But her story goes back to the streets of North Philly. So I always rep her cultura because she couldn't. As a mixed-race child born in orphanages in AmeriKKK, or what I happily call AmeriClan, her body, her human form was molested over 200 times by the time she was 2 years old. She was sold by her mama in the Philadelphia Inquirer, or at least her mom thought she was doing that as an immigrant teen mama, trying to figure out what to do with her broken life and the missionary Catholicism. And so, you know, she barely made it. She was probably one of the most dangerous things you can be, which is an unprotected child anywhere on Mama Earth. And so anything happened to her. But she kept it going. She stayed alive by any means necessary, like a lot of us folks do. a shade of the strength of our mamas. Can I get a witness of how many mamas in the audience? For without whom there would be no us, and to the coming and the future mamas, to the daughters, to the sons. So, you know, she got with my colonizer dad because she'd been taught that whiteness was rightness. And so she reinvented herself like people do. And she passed and did these things that she thought would make it okay. And then I came out. And when she'd get mad at me, she'd call me a white bitch. So that's real talk, though. Because we're poor people. My mom was OG ghetto fabulous, and she was beautiful, and she was an artist, and she was a survivor. And she kept on keeping on by any means. But so when she got her little job off of welfare and, you know, and thought she would made it and worked for a convent, they ended up firing her eventually because she was practicing revolutionary social work. That's family restoration, not family separation, like the child separation services that they hit with us poor mamas all the time. And after that, she just couldn't keep on keeping on. She said it was another little murder of the soul. And so we ended up unable to keep going. And basically what that meant is we couldn't keep making the paper to pay the rent to keep a roof over our head. So we began engaging in the underground economic strategies that a lot of us poor folks do. We started a family business to stay alive. A lot of us poor families do underground businesses because that check only goes till about the 16th. And so what? Many of us do things, or we're part of the group of vendedores, right, that people only associate with the so-called global south. But there's poor families doing businesses and micro businesses all over. So that's what we were doing. And when we had enough money, we would, you know, we would try to get a place and stay inside. And the rest of the time we were in doorways and street corners in the back of our hoopties, holding on by any means. In the case of me, walking the world looking like I do, at 12 years old, I put on a Kmart suit and told the landlord I was 25 years old, making $65,000 a year, and they believed me, because racism is alive and well in American. When my mama went for the same apartment, they turned her down flat. So all that to say, food insecurity was our middle name. I'm talking 7-Eleven, we pop open a can of Chef or ID and puts it in the microwave. That was a good day. So I'm so humbled to be sitting next to these two cooks. You know, I cooked those little hot dog weenies, and then sometimes you'd put the cereal in it too to kind of make it go further, and whatever we could do in the back seat of a car or when we weren't being seen, because in this society poor people can't be seen because we supposedly got it okay. Nowadays, of course, us unhoused folks are the unhoused nation, so you can't keep pushing us away. We there. And I hope some of you can understand that we've all been sold the corporate notion of scarcity and emptiness. And so that if we see people living on the street, somehow we equate it with trash and with messiness. But I'd like to decolonize your minds from that lie today. So all that to say, coming out of that ongoing struggle, and it lasted over 10 years until I was 18, and then I was incarcerated for 3 months. I did hard time for the act of being unhoused, because if you don't already know, it's a crime to sleep, sit, or stand on the street while looking poor, whatever that race and class notion is. But of course, if you're in a concert laying in the park, ain't nobody gonna give you a citation, right? So in our case, I got all these tickets, me and my mom, for sleeping in our car, and eventually I did 3 months, because we live in a money bail state, and if you didn't have the cash, you did the time. And all that to say, that was another moment of food insecurity. Can I get a witness on inside the plantation prison apartheid system, where if you don't know already, we got apartheid up in this mofo, because that is all people of color, with 1 or 2 token white folks just thrown in the pot, poor white people. And we get probably the most intentional poisoning of any population in the U.S. Intentional poisoning, because there are messages and things told to you that we don't give you food that keeps you alive. And you got a problem with it? Why'd you get here? So there is a constant message that is purposeful and intentional, telling us that if we made these bad choices, which poor people like to be, they like to throw at us poor folks, bad choices to have children and bad choices to survive by any means necessary, then we deserve to be poisoned, right? Well, I want to take that same notion broader. I want to hold up my mama who transitioned EYA March of 2006 at the very young age of 59 because she got diabetes and cardiomyopathy, which are illnesses that specifically hit poor women and poor women of color. Because she had what I call the problem of a healthy mouth being a wealthy mouth, meaning you all got money, you can't get dental care. They just put it in a little bit in California now, but for the stretches of time, basically you don't got cash, you don't get to keep the privilege of your teeth. And when you get infections and you can't take care of them, they travel into your heart. As well, they experimented on my mom in those orphanages, and so she had thyroid disease. That's what they do to poor children all the time, and today, right now. And that all to say that so many of our poor folks of all colors are dying of what I call poor people diseases. So I'm sure I don't have to tell you conscious folks, you're already on it. There's some really beautiful things I heard today and that are happening. But I want to name that specifically because I feel like that goes into a bigger conversation about how do you care for folks in struggle. When you talk about food insecurity, the two are meshed. So let me go back to my story really, and I'll try to get done with this. I know it's only beginning. So in our case, me and Mama stayed together. In this society, they encourage you to get out the house at 18, and you're a failure if you don't, because they need to feed institutions like this with what I call the away nation, so that you're 5,000 and 6,000 miles away from the people who made you, who taught you, who birthed you, and who made you be what you are. And that means whatever color and class you are, that's what you're taught. And so you're thousands of miles away from your elders, from the folks who care and watch over you. So all that to say, we were in this situation where we could barely keep going on because the jail time was the final little break. And so my mama started inching in and auditing classes in black studies, raza studies, and women's studies. And consciousness saved us, because she started to be able to connect the dots between poor people and poor women of color all over the globe. And at that same time, a landlord didn't charge us the rent, didn't give us an eviction notice the first time we couldn't pay the rent, because she looked at me, and it was a woman of color. She was from China, and she said, "You're a good daughter. You're a good daughter." And so for the first time, our lives were not called enmeshed and pathologized, but they were called supportive and loving. And what I did was to care for my mama by any means, because as an indigenous daughter, that's what we do. And so we came up out of that and started to be able to think for the first time. And as we thought, we started to connect these dots, and that led us to being able to start with other fabulous poverty scholars, as we call ourselves, poor people with lived knowledge, not learned knowledge, the love of our elders and ancestors, not institutional religions. We actually came forward to start Poor Magazine. Fast forward, because I think that that's important. There's a lot of things I'm crossing over, but I'll just go to it. The first issue of Poor Magazine, which was a physical copy, was called Homefulness. So I want you to hold that in your mouth. Homefulness, which is a poor people-led solution to homelessness. And my mama didn't raise no talker. So one of the things that bothered her the most is talking a lot about things. Blah, 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 not actually trying to do them. Fast forward to 2011, on the anniversary of my mom's passing, and we bought, and I do say bought because I don't believe in the buying and selling of Mother Earth. There would be no gentrification if we weren't continuing to see Mother Earth as a commodity. We bought, because we live in a settler colonial lie, the land that became and is becoming homefulness in Deep East Weechene, Oakland, Ohlone land. And we've started a liberation school. But one of the first, and a lot of other things, we're building housing for us poor people. And a lot of folks, it's a big story because we didn't get it through grants or government politics. We got it through teaching young folks with race and class privilege about the concept of redistribution and something I call community reparations, which means we cannot continue the violent act of looking away, which is what we are taught to normalize in this society. So we started this thing called People School, and we teach folks, and you're all welcome to come. The next semester's in Black August, and we also share and teach with other poor people and indigenous people-led movements how to do the model we're doing, because homefulness was never just about us. It was about us, because we can't continue to create and be a part of about us without us. To end this moment right now, I just want to say that one of the first things we did, before we did anything else, is start the Sliding Scale Cafe, where we were getting our folks with race and class privilege to help us buy organic, expensive, bougie-ass food from Whole Paycheck and make it into the Whole Paycheck too. Okay. Make it into all that food that y'all eat all the time, or some of you do, and that we never eat. And going back to the brothers and sisters who passed from these poor people illnesses. And if you have money, you kick it down for someone else. And if you don't, you eat for free as much and as often as you need to. We also started what we call the poor people gardens. A lot of these community gardens, they throw up fences and frickin' lights and alarm systems, and God forbid us homeless people walk in there and try to get a carrot, because we'll go to jail for that theft. In our community, poor people gardens, everybody, all the elders in the neighborhood continue to eat fresh, organic, healthy food. Thank you.
So there is no eating without provisioning. And as an anthropologist, I always stress with my students that food provisioning, preparation, sharing, production is just as culturally meaningful, as well as obviously practically important as eating. So I think that came through in everything you said. So Kyla, indigestion, indigestibility.
Kyla, I feel like Kyla, token bourgeois Marxist academic on the panel. Yeah.
So if you could just talk a little bit about how you came to theorize indigestibility as a means of doing, socially conscious research and intervention, and from your end.
Sure.
Thanks.
Where to start? Academia is my fourth career. Can you hear me? This is better, right? Yeah, so academia is my fourth career. Probably one of the best things that ever happened to me is that I was not born in the States. I was born in Canada in a period where we still had a social net. So as a first generation graduate of college, I was able to go to college for like $1,000 a year. I had health care. All of those things helped me be here in this moment. In terms of this being my fourth career, I started out as a dancer. I worked as a dancer all through childhood and dropped out of high school to be a dancer. I then dropped out of college and worked in women's shelters, did anti-violence work and anti-racist work for a long time. Then I went back to college. Then I was a journalist. I did gay and lesbian journalism while still doing a lot of activist work, all through being an undergrad and then through grad school, which I realize is like a very immigrant narrative. This is the first time in my life that I only have one job, and I'm still looking for the pyramid scheme to run on the side, because it doesn't feel natural to me. My time working in the women's shelter was really important to me. I worked with mostly working class women. I worked with mostly with then other working class women. Now I'm no longer working class. I worked mostly with West Indian women who had, there's enormous West Indian migration to Canada because of the Commonwealth system, and West Indian women who had grown up in Manly's Jamaica and who had grown up sort of in really progressive and intellectually vibrant Caribbean life. And so I worked in this sort of feminist socialist collective, and it really has formed the foundation for me. I think of my research practice and my life as fundamentally based in women of color feminism that is organized around a socialist praxis and a critique of capitalism, period. And it's not because I'm an intellectual, it's because I started there and those women taught me what they knew. But when I started working as a journalist, I knew I wanted to write about food. And it was the moment where food, what we now think of as foodie culture, which is a term in a culture I find abhorrent, but what we now think of as foodie culture was starting. And when I worked in the women's shelter, the kitchen was the most charged space in the house. It was the most charged, it was the most culturally charged, there were the most fights over resources, there were the most sort of, the most struggles, the most encounters, and you'd have the neighborhood where I worked in Toronto was largely East African and West African migrants, so Ghanaian women, Somali women, Egyptian women, also West Indians, a large working class white population, and also South Asians, and when a woman from one culture, like talking about the goat's head, I had noted in my head that I would talk about goat's head today, right? That when a woman from one culture, coming out of the particular trauma of violence that she was dealing with, opened the fridge to look for some comfort and encountered a goat's head in red sauce and a bowl of fufu, stuff came up. Holding that sort of experience as working in the women's shelter against the writing that I was doing in food journalism, I couldn't reconcile them, right? I couldn't understand, and particularly in the context of Canadian multiculturalism, right? So Canada always wants to congratulate itself about its multiculturalism, which completely elides the settler colonial, violence, its ongoing settler colonial violence. So, I really wanted to ask this question as I began my life as a scholar. Why is it that people will eat food from cultures that they would not let, when they would not let, say, their daughters marry a man from that culture? Like, how can I reconcile the violence that's happening on Toronto streets, the violence of at that time, there was the Black Action Defense Committee was very active around the issue of police violence. So how do I reconcile the violence against Black youth with the kind of cosmopolitanism of middle-class bourgeois culture that's paying me, right, as I get through school, that wants to teach each other a certain kind of mobility and expertise? How do I do that? And I ended up wanting to think about the mouth, and wanting to think about eating, and wanted to think about the kind of violence of cannibalism, and specifically white cannibalism. I wanted to think about what it feels like to be eaten alive by whiteness. And as I started with that question, I went back through history, and looked at these archives, I found an ongoing and recurring image of Black children as edible, as edible objects, as chocolate, as licorice, and that became the place where my writing began. Why does whiteness feel like it's eating us alive? And why does it look so polite when it's doing it? How does it manage those two things? So that's sort of where my writing, that's where my sort of, my writing work started. I'll just say another part of my life, or another part of my work is that I love nice things. I like nice things. We didn't come here not to have nice things. And, it's something my mom will say to me. And I remember very specifically this sort of crisis moment for me. In Toronto, we had sort of echo riots after the Rodney King riot. So the Rodney King riots happened here in LA. And the Black Action Defense Committee was pulling together was pulling together protests every weekend at 52 Division and at City Hall. And it was very clear the weekend after the Rodney King riots that we were going to riot in Toronto. Like, we were going to face off against the police. Do police ride on horseback in the U.S., or is it only Canadian? They do sometimes. But anyway, so like the police were like ready. The police were just gonna like fuck us up, and we were ready. We were gonna fuck them up too. And so there's a lot of documentation around it now. Ronaldo Walcott writes about it. But there was very specifically this moment, and where people were starting to smash storefront windows, and people, and specifically they smashed the Armani boutique, and there was this really beautiful suit in the front window of the Armani boutique, and I stood there thinking, like, I really love beauty, and I really care about aesthetics, and I'm deeply political, and I want to riot, and like, how do these two things come together? And so my work is very much about now aesthetics, and the politics of aesthetics, and the politics of what is distributed as beauty, the politics of what is distributed as desire and desirable, and the politics of, as we've been talking about, undesirability and disgust, or in other words, what the theorist Rancière, my colleague Davide Panaggia, who writes about this, would call the distribution of the sensible. How are our senses organized for us so that we get called into particular political orders? The theorist Sylvia Wynter does say, we are addicted to the products of empire. There is no sweetness in our lives without colonial extraction and slavery. We are addicted and energized. There is no sugar buzz until after colonialism and slavery. Our very energy, our very everyday senses of being in our bodies are organized by this idea of the distribution of senses overlaid on top of, capitalist racism and its regimes. So that's really kind of the center of, that's what I do.
That's great, and it actually segues really nicely to both of the next two themes. So I am going to arbitrarily start with, actually I'll just pick up with the very last piece, to talk about health. So you mentioned sugar, right? So sugar, again, we all know is, to some extent toxic, poisonous, and it's love, right? This is just an invitation to talk about health. And by health, I don't mean just what do you eat, but how do you feed the people that you love, right? With regard to thinking about what's conveyed in the food that is available to provide, which may be an expression of care, and where that care can be in tension, the health part and the treat, the well-deserved treat, or the expression of love and comfort. So just to open up with that, maybe. And maybe you guys can maybe you can start, Tanya, and then you guys just feel free to jump in, and I'd love to have a conversation.
In the work that I do is like an unofficial food educator, because I don't have the alphabet behind my name. I'm not like Tanya Fields, MSW, dietitian, RSN, XYZ, or whatever. These things that validate, you being able, as a black woman, I'm always consistently being asked to show my papers, which is very much rooted in sort of slavery and racism itself. Whenever I'm in these spaces, I'm always asked like, well, what are your credentials? What makes you an expert? I'm like, I showed up, bitch. That's what makes me an expert, right? And I have lived experience, and I managed to feed 6 kids and not kill none of them, And so I always like to honor that narrative when I'm going into these spaces. So I get into these spaces that are largely like well-meaning white women, dietitians, nutritionists, public health practitioners, MDs, physician's assistants, and they'll always invite like me, and I'll be like, why did y'all ask me to come here? Because I'm gonna say some shit y'all don't like, and I'll be in these rooms, and then they'll be like, well, tell us how poor people eat, Tanya. And I've always got to challenge them on language, right? So this idea around good food and bad food, That's like the first thing, right? I'm like, y'all go into these spaces, like the New York City, it's getting better, but farmers markets maybe 10 years ago started having food educators, and community nonprofits were given block grants and grants from the municipality to have community food educators come in. And they're like at the farmers markets and they're teaching people how to make like certain things. They're using like wheat germ, and I'm like, nobody's gonna eat that shit. Like, first of all, it's boring. Where's your seasoning? It doesn't culturally resonate with the people there, and you're talking to them like they're idiots, right? And you're indicting the food that they're already eating. That's the first thing. So when you use that kind of language, good and bad, and poor people, as we already know, are indicted for so many things. We're indicted for existing. Something goes, and we're seeing it so much. I mean, we've seen it before, but this administration is like the bastardized love child of racism, sexism, homophobia, everything, right? That's why when people are like, that's not my president, I'm like, yes, he is. He is your president. He is exactly what happens when you take the veneer off of polite racism. He is exactly what happens when you take the veneer off of polite sexism. And he didn't get there by himself. That man is an idiot. I don't think he could put his pants on by himself, right? He was propped up by a whole bunch of people, both Republicans and Democrats. And it'd be very easy to get him out of this administration if people wanted him out, if the people who were propping him up wanted him out. So I say all that to say, every day I'm living with images, not veiled at all, openly hostile images that attack poor people, that attack immigrants. We want our food cheap, and then we're talking about deporting folks. Like, I don't understand it, right? This is a man who has made millions and had access to billions of dollars based off the stolen and exploited capital of the very people that he seeks to oppress, right? And so poor people have to live with that every day. And then here I come stepping here talking about quinoa and your bad food, right? And so we have to be very careful about the language that we are using and thinking about that. And I want to say thank you, because when we talk about health, so much is about, like, for a lot of public health practitioners, it's about the metrics. What's your blood pressure? What's your BMI? BMI is bullshit anyway, and we need to get rid of it. You know, what's your BMI? What's your blood pressure? You know, all of these different metrics, right? What are the cancer rates? And then whiteness is always centered in it. That's first of all. What does it look like juxtaposed to more affluent white communities, right? And so while I understand why we want those metrics, right? But it doesn't get down to the sort of nuanced things like, how do people feel? And also the psychology of eating. Sugar literally stimulates the same part of your brain as heroin. So if I am going to a job where I am making less than a living wage, where I have to deal with, I don't even believe in the term microaggressions, but it's like universal vernacular now, microaggressions, right? Because it's all macro. I'm dealing with microaggressions every day. I'm in a community where my partner might be absent or incarcerated, where I am constantly being harassed by police, where capitalism has commodified time. Time is money. People kill me with this slow food movement, and they don't realize that that's a privilege, but it's also hypocrisy. I'm at these meetings 5:30 in the evening, and we're talking about, let's make sure that we are at home eating around the same table, and I'm like, who feeding your kid right now? Right. Where is Brandon, and who is feeding him, right? We only talk about that when we're talking about how do we further pathologize black people and people of color and immigrant communities and poor people. Because Brandon was able, like, can order Uber Eats. And this is all stuff like my daughter, because of while I still consider us low income, we do have a certain level of proximity to access by me doing this work. And that's something I constantly wrestle with in doing this. I'm the same as the people in my community, but I'm different. My daughter calls and I'm out somewhere at some meeting like now, and she'll call me and be like, Mom, can I have your debit card number? Because I'm gonna order Grubhub. And I'm like, why can't you just cook the salmon that's in the freezer? She's like, because being able to order out makes her feel affluent and accomplished. And we've commodified that. So when poor people get a little extra money, when they get their earned income tax credit, and I like to call it being hood rich, you know what I'm saying? And then we want to pathologize them for going out and getting TVs, buying new furniture, cheap ass furniture they have to buy, replace in the next year, or taking their family to a nice restaurant, and dropping $100 so they can feed their like partner and 2 kids. I'm like, they're just replicating what we do already. This is the system that capitalism sets up. I think about I'm a Virgo. We like really nice shit. I'm always like, yes, down with capitalism. I'm a democratic socialist. And I'm like, ooh, I went to Paris and I was like, I want me some Louis Vuitton luggage. I was like, no, girl, no. It's hard. Those things make you feel valuable. How do we then, in a system that's commodified everything, including including health and including food, then continue to demonize poor people for being a part of that system? When other black people start talking about, like, this whole types in my community are like, y'all want to go out and spend all this money going to see Black Panther in Wakanda and we could build a Wakanda. I'm like, shut the hell up. Like, because it lacks so much, like, actual, it lacks a certain sophistication and nuance of thinking about how folks got here. Black folks, and I speak specifically from that lens, it's not about excluding other folks. I just try to stay in my lane, right? And so my lens is very uniquely African American, right? And I acknowledge it as a diaspora, that blackness is not monolithic, that the experiences of a continental African immigrant is going to be different than someone like myself who is the ancestor, the product of an enslaved African who was brought here through the transatlantic slave trade. But for many African Americans, getting a pair of Jordans gives them a sense of worthiness. Because when they step into larger society, if they don't look like shit, if I send my kids to school, and I see it all the time, I grew up in white spaces. I was bused to school. My father was like, your grandmother lives in the last solitary project in the Upper West Side after it was gentrified. We're gonna use her address and get you sent to a magnet school. So me and a handful of other black kids were bused to white schools. Those kids could come to school with mismatched socks, looking crazy, wearing tutus and pajama pants, and I was like, oh, look at them, they're so liberated. She's just so innovative. That was like the next Tim Burton. If my hair was out of place, if I got a stain during lunchtime, if I happened to wake up that day and put on something that was too small, somebody was gonna call ACS. Because they're not taking care of this little poor black child that gets bused here. What does that, generations of that, say to the people who are here suffering under that? I've got to look 10 times as good as everybody else next to me. When I started this work, I started doing mommy and me yoga classes. And the first class, like, nobody showed up. Nobody in my community was interested in yoga. It was like, what is this lady talking about? The fuck is she talking about yoga? So then I just started offering food. I was like, if you come, I'll make you smoothies, and I'll give you fancy, funky cheese, and I'll get Cars crackers, and then everybody showed up. With their kids, though, and I was not equipped for that. So they're trying to do yoga, and this little kid's like, Mom, slapping her in the face while she's in downward dog. So then we started including childcare. And then the women kept showing up, but they weren't showing up for the yoga. They were showing up for brie. They were showing up for crack pepper water crackers. They were showing up for the child care so that they could just get 10 minutes with another adult. That's right. And somebody else is gonna take care of their kid. And then there would be like a woman I remember one woman kept coming, and then she disappeared for 3 weeks. And I called and I said, what happened? And she said, I had an emotional breakdown. I mentally cannot be there. And I'm like looking for a job, and it seems just arbitrary and frivolous to get up every Saturday morning, use certain resources to get my kid ready, to have to like feed him in the morning and all this kind of stuff, to get him out the house. I'm already mentally feeling bad when I really should be looking for a job. And that was an eye-opener for me. We can have all this fancy shit in our community. I can continue to try to replicate the stuff that I went to school around. But if there's no infrastructure to support people, if in a capitalist society we're not thinking about social movements that have a short-term financial incentive with a long-term financial strategy, then I'm not doing my fucking job. And so that's when I was like, I've got to include economics. And I started looking at the Black Panthers and thinking about the breakfast program. I was like, we got to get back to thinking about what our 10 or 20-point economic model is going to be. We've got to think about how we give people what they need while we're also asking for them to decolonize their mind. It is disingenuous to ask people to decolonize their mind, and then when it's all said and done, they're just sitting there in scarcity. James Baldwin said that it is very expensive to be poor. There is a lot of money put into making sure people stay poor. If you look at Section 8, if you look at affordable housing, if you look at food stamps stimulate the economy. So when Republicans start talking about starving children, because that's what it means when they say they want to cut back and defund food stamps, the largest recipient are children. So they are literally talking about killing kids when they say that. They're also cutting off their nose to spite their face, because that is an economy stimulator, food stamps. There's lots of money involved in that. And so I think that we have to think about those things. As I myself look at my continuing health, as I look at my father has, heart issues and hypertension, and at 37, I just started seeing my heart rate, my blood pressure go up and up and up, and knowing that's hereditary. My grandmother's lost a leg to diabetes, suffered her second stroke that took her ability to even be able to feed herself, and now is on a permanent feeding tube. I think about the ways in which I have to think about food, because food, while for so many of us, it is lovingness. When I sat in my grandmother's kitchen and she made one of them diabetes-inducing upside down pineapple cakes from a box, and then added all that canned pineapple and the heavy syrup on top and put those maraschino cherries that never digest in your system, that was my grandmother saying, I love you. Yeah. How do you demonize that? While also understanding that it took her eyesight, it took her ability to swallow, it cost her leg. That is literally, ironically, that is the absolute reflection of capitalism. And so we have to think about how we do that work in our community, and as I try to get fit to want to mitigate some of that happening to me in my future, and thinking about I'm going to be responsible for children for like the rest of my life, I'm like, there are no like, I want to take Soul Cycle. That's just $95 a month. A simple yoga studio, even on community days, it's at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, it's $8. But poor people work at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. So it's really just for like students and people who have the luxury of having non-traditional jobs who are just too cheap to pay the $20 to go to yoga class. All of those things that make us feel good, that give us value, they're commodified. But I also understand trying to do them for free. I was not able to sustain that Mommy and Me yoga class. It took money to run. And I couldn't ask for that money from the people who were coming. And then the foundations who talk a good game about making sure that they're empowering the people, you see so much of that same racism and white supremacy running through their funding practices. And so I don't think there are any easy answers around that. I think that we just have to continue to keep trying to flesh it out, and continue to try to throw shit up against the wall and see what sticks.
Tanya?
Oh, okay. Okay. The poor people's plate is rooted in capitalist hate for the 3 job-working mamas caught in the welfare state. So that's part of a story that I and my fellow welfare queens, and I do say that not just in jest, but it's a theater and activism project that we started together as poor mamas, single mamas, and dealing with the criminalization. I think you've heard tonight from myself and Tanya that hits us all the time in small and large and everyday ways. Going back to the question of sugar, though, and the reason that I bring that up is I just want to talk again about, to me, again, the intentional poisoning, right? The things that are available to us, the things that we can get. So in the state of California, we had a specific hater who I guess was governor for a minute. There's so many. My favorite line, politricksters is just a trick. So let's be real about that-ish. So in this case, they started the WIC program. How many of you know about that? Yeah, so, and that might have become federal, I don't know, right? But it specifically enabled you to get certain really effed up products. Like, it's almost, and they even had a mandate, because when I had my son, fast forward to when my mom was sick with what took her to the other side, and right at that moment, We lost all our funding. We started a program to teach journalism to poor mamas like us, right in the moment of welfare deform. And I didn't have no training for that. I was in a welfare office and I saw the RFP on the wall and I went, oh, that looks like some money. Let me teach myself to write a grant, because that's what we do. We do whatever we got to do. We write a grant to the city and county of San Francisco. We got the first welfare to work grant, teaching folks like ourselves how to do, not really do journalism, but really, we're all writers, we all have a voice. We just don't have spaces to be heard, and so we made sure that our fellow folk had those spaces and gave them those tools, because the digital divide is real. And so all that to say, eventually they took that money away because we refused to report on poor mamas who didn't show up on time, because we have 3 other hustles going on, because we got the hustles and traumas already in our head from the struggle to even stay alive and keep our kids in a bed. And so after that happened, you know, the organization, which is a poor people-led organization, so we're enmeshed with our struggle and we're transparent about it. There's no lies there. The organization became homeless, and so did me and my mom, but now I was pregnant. And it was a particular kind of hell, right, to deal with being, you know, having a baby and also dealing with this experience and that struggle and all of the things that I dealt with. But now I wasn't a kid anymore. Now I was the one, and I was holding an elder who was very upset. And our elders who get sick and have had a life like we've had, they don't get happier when they become older. So anyway, I was liberating cheese from Walgreens, right? I was doing whatever I had to do, because people had to be fed, and I didn't have that money. And a lot of times us poor folks will do different navigations with these crumbs that they throw at us. So there was a thing called the in-home support services, which is if you take care of elder, you get a little, you know, crumb. But in my mom's case, we couldn't afford the medicine. So I would just sign the check over to her, which really just meant we had absolutely no money. And because of that being on my name, I couldn't qualify for that fake-ass ABT. So it was a situation, let me tell you. And I don't know how we lived it, but you get through what you get through by any means. But anyway, all that to say, there was this moment when we were trying to basically feed each other, right? So as fellow welfare queens and poor mamas, and inside the struggle, not to that place where we're like a little bit better, which I as well and my son and other family members are. And you do all kinds of things you got to do. So we would pool those WIC checks and go in and get a lot of effed up food, right? So they would give you the government cheese, they would give you the GMO milk, they would give you the, you know, the cereal that's got like happily all kinds of ish that none of us can pronounce in it. And you eat that because that's all there is, and you get creative with it. And there was a moment when myself and my sister Junebug, one of the other welfare queens, we were like, literally would challenge, because we were also revolutionaries and soldiers for the people and organizers right at the same time as being in this trauma. And so we were challenging them. We're like, well, WIC agent, why don't you give us the GMO-free, the organic? And they were like, well, that's a mandate, we can't. And oh, by the way, we need to take a blood test again for the 30th time of you and your baby. So all I'm saying with that is that, again, going back to this intentional poisoning, and I really do see that. And I want to bring this conversation, especially around sugar, because I want to always bring everything back to this, back to redistribution of stolen and hoarded wealth and reparations. I see a lot of beautiful things happening here at your PowerPoint going on right here, and I'm really big ups to y'all here for actually doing what looks like real work to redistribute food. But I keep seeing a thing in the theme, which is that UCLA students, and I'm glad that UCLA students are being taken care of. But there's a hell of a lot of folk outside this confines of this plantation institution that are also hungry. And so I want to challenge anybody in the audience who happens to have access to a trust fund to see me afterwards, because I'm straight, I'm real talk about that. We started the Bank of Community Reparations, where we're trying to start funds, the Poor Mama Pañale Fund, when poor mamas can't afford those diapers. Basically the food fund, when you've gotten to the 15th and you don't got no more EBT. Or even better, when we need to buy the halal beef or the other meat that we need to actually make our communities healthy, but we can't use the EBT or the WIC for that, right? And so what we're trying to do is redistribute and reparate so that our communities actually eat this healthy food, and that there is a way to actually do that where you're connecting the dots, right? And I'm always about solutions, and we can make that happen. Going back to homefulness, we have not built those houses yet because we are poor folks and we're raising the money slowly but surely. But we started a liberation school. I want to call in Auntie Frances, the Self-Help Hunger Program, one of our Black Panther revolutionaries who is in North Oakland facing eviction because we are in the gentrification nation up there. I want to call that in when we talk about food insecurity as well, because she does a food program just like we do at Homefulness, and she's one of our elder teachers at People School and Homefulness. She does a food program for the elders who lived in that community, are now no longer in houses because of the paper trail theft of tax bills and all the other things that poor folks, and specifically people of color and specifically black folks, get to take the assets and the equity away that they raised and they had. And I want to say that she's not able to stay in her community and do that because of the gentrification nation. So again, when we talk about food security, we talk about poor people lifting ourselves up, we talk about self-determination, we also need to talk about reparations. And we need to talk about how do you connect those resources that a lot of folks maybe in this institution have to make sure that migrante warriors in East LA are being gentrificated out of their neighborhood. Shout out to Lydia Ponce and I Don't Know More Venice, and to all the folks in in Ghost Town is what they call our poor people neighborhood in Venice, and all the other poor neighborhoods and Skid Row who can't get access to land because we do need to buy it. As poor mamas, specifically, and elders and disabled folks, shout out to my brother Leroy Moore, Crip Hop Nation, another elder at Poor Magazine, we are not in a position to squat spaces, folks. All power to y'all who do that. But in our position, what we're trying to do is actually walk the same way some of y'all do. To walk in a way that makes us able to safely attain equity and not ever face that kind of removal. Because that is food security.
Thank you.
Sure. Yeah. I wanted, I was saying to some friends the other day that I hope when I die, I know as little as possible about coffee and wine as I can ever manage. And what I was saying when I said that is that, like, I'm not interested in taste, and I am interested in flavor. And I'm really interested in how the ways how we talk about food are often about the performance of class identity. And for me as a teacher, which is I see where my main political work is now. For me as a teacher, I'm really actually interested in displeasure as a teaching method. When I teach food studies, and all of you who teach about food or come to places where people want to talk about food, the first way they want to come to food is to talk about pleasure. And I think the politicization of pleasure, which is like, it's when people of color and when women of color get pleasure that all of a sudden people develop a critique of capital. It comes out of nowhere. But also that, like, our jobs as teachers are, especially in privileged institutions like my institution, which is a wealthy institution. It's wealthy because it owns the water rights to Pomona Valley, which is to say that we're wealthy because we have extracted those resources from the Gabrielino people. That's what pays my salary. That my job is to mess with the ideas around food that allow people to easily slip into reproducing hierarchies that they could intervene in. So there's pleasure in the politicization of pleasure, but then I also really want to think with displeasure and discomfort as a way of pushing back in some of our work.
I'm mindful of the time, so I'm going to ask the next question to Rick, which is, in a way, the inverse of what you just said, Kyla, or just to keep this tension between pleasure and displeasure, or aesthetics and ugliness, right? And maybe I wanted to hear you talk about art and aesthetics in the projects that you're doing, in part because I'm coming from Boston, and I just want to go and eat every avocado and every orange that I can see right now and sustain myself for a few more months when I have to go home. So I know that that is part of what you're doing. So maybe you could end us there.
Yeah, having been an artist coming into the nonprofit world, I'll totally own it. I came out of wanting to build a sandbox that I would want to play in every day. If I was going to create a space and an office and an organization, there were going to be people that I wanted to work with that I felt had the integrity and the challenging intelligence to create an organism that was whole. And for that to happen, I didn't want it to happen in blank cinder blocks. I wanted to reflect the joy and the abundance that the organization was again, working through in Los Angeles and hoping to share. And so we very quickly started engaging artists in various projects, whether they were graphic designers that would create a bandana to celebrate a milestone that would be given out to volunteers and to donors and such, or it was going to an exhibition at LACMA and seeing a giant piece of art called Oranges on Fire by Larry Sultan, which somehow just like grabbed me. It grabbed me because oranges was our patron saint. The Valencia orange was what we harvested first and is what we kept coming back to, and represented to me again both the good and the bad of the California dream. We began acquiring and having artists who wanted to be part of Food Forward's journey, reflecting as we grew. And now if you come to our offices in North Hollywood, it's now a 2-unit light industrial complex near Sherman Way and Fulton. We've created a space, I think, that reflects through art and food what we hope this can be. It's very clear that the organization has had the good fortune of being able to hold on to those pieces of art, and when I walk through it, whether it's with a donor or a volunteer or a recipient, I hope that people can tie together, again, that idea of what self-expression is through, whether it's writing or it's painting or it's photography, that experience and what food brings to us as well.
We have a few more minutes. If there are 1 or 2 questions from the audience, there's a microphone in the center.
I want to hear something about this fermentation stuff. That all about?
Did you say more?
There what? Yeah.
I'm talking about waste, and you mentioned in the beginning fermentation. Please elucidate.
Yeah, I'll say something about that. I'm writing a little chapter on fermentation, so thank you, and I'll pay you your $50 later. But we, so I'm writing about the turn of the 20th century and about food and drug laws. And fermentation is how people stayed alive when they couldn't. Oh crap! Sorry. Okay, yeah. Hi. So fermentation is how people stayed alive when they weren't able to test their own water resources, right? And so fermentation is what you do to water to turn it into beer, or to turn it into kefir, or to turn it into water kefir, or like whatever you do to stay alive because your water is unsanitary. And fermentation is also about food preservation. So when the Food and Drug Act shut down fermentation and shut down a lot of the kind of fermentation technologies that were, were really the technologies of poor people, of working class people, of the formerly enslaved, and of immigrants. So fermentation and the kind of return of fermentation, if you want to say that, because people have also been doing it all along, right, is politically interesting right now because it's a way of thinking about how to, as people were saying, resource food that looks like waste. It's an old food wisdom. And I think this question of returning to old food wisdoms, one of the questions we were given was about sort of alternative economics, which I think people have already addressed. But, without romanticizing without romanticizing the past, which does not deserve to be romanticized, there are many foodways in all of our historical past that we need to come back to because, we're in the last century of human life on Earth, possibly, and we need to figure out what it's going to be like to live in garbage, and some of us have been living in garbage all along. So that question of ecological decline, of living in waste, and of actually hacking the waste and hacking the waste economy is one of the ways in which I think thinking about fermentation becomes important. But also it's just good for you. We should all be trying to access it.
This conversation, so when the introduction started, I felt myself getting a little bit uncomfortable, and I feel myself feeling further uncomfortable because, again, language is important. I would challenge many of us that our ancestors who practiced this did not see it as preserving waste. It was an extension of their food system. And I think what's interesting about fermentation, and I have a lot of white farmy friends who live upstate, Birkenstock, tattered clothing, live on a farm, white, right? Who generally, when we start talking about race and class, those are the white folks, when they talk about I don't have privilege, that give me pause, right? Those are the ones that I handle with a certain level of gentleness, right? When I'm talking about, I understand that you don't have class privilege, but it doesn't trump your racial privilege. Or, first of all, whiteness in and of itself is a myth. So that's kind of where I wanted to go with this as well. I think for fermentation, for a lot of folks, we see it coming back now in this small batch, artisanal food shit that we see happening, which annoys me because for a lot of white folks, this is the opportunity for them to start getting in touch with indigenous European culture. The first thing that they did when they tricked y'all white folks into believing that whiteness was a thing was get you to surrender your indigenous identity. And if you are going to really be a part of, or an ally, which is a term that I hate because it's been so overwrought and overused and people don't actually really even know what it means anymore, but if you're going to walk in that path of alliance with folks, you've got to surrender whiteness. But I am a true believer that you can't give up something if there ain't nothing else for you to go to. So for a lot of folks, this idea of letting go of whiteness is what do you mean give up whiteness? Well, where do I go after that? Well, you find out, as my folks say, find out who your people are. Find out who your people are. I mean, I know Ancestry.com is tricking us all into selling them our DNA and stuff, but I wouldn't suggest you start there, but I mean, just opening up a census. For a lot of white folks, y'all did get to come through Ellis Island. My ancestors got pushed onto a boat and brought here under the worst conditions. There are ways to track that, right? And if you are looking at, this is a food way that is a connection to that indigenous European tradition. That's a real thing. We talk a lot about indigenous folks, and when we talk about indigenous folks, we are talking about the majority of the time people of color. I understand that and I respect that, but understanding also too that race is a social construct, which has very real implications, and talking about how whiteness is a myth. If white people are going to reject whiteness in the quest to deconstruct anti-black racism, which really is the fulcrum of all racism in this country, starts with anti-blackness, right? Then you've got to figure out where your people are from. Who are your people? And thinking about indigenous European traditions that so many people have given up in order to benefit from this myth of whiteness. But I get a little uncomfortable I don't think it's intentional, but language is important to me when we think about the practice of fermentation and preservation as a preservation of waste, because I'm not entirely sure that many of our ancestors who practiced this and laid this for us thought about it in that vein. And because language is important, thinking about it in that way, I don't know, it's just icky for me. I don't have the words.
I'll just say that as someone who's practiced food preservation, one of the metaphor that I'll come back to is I've always loved that when you're making, for example, red wine vinegar, you do it with a mother. And what that means as far as, where it all comes from and sharing that mother, and as it multiplies, bringing it back and having it be a community resource that is endless. Because once you've started that fermentation process, it just self-replicates. And I think, again, as a way in which the economies of stopping food preservation, in a sense, I think, to promote manufactured food over time, it's really kind of criminal. And what hoops we've had to jump through to just allow ourselves cottage food acts here in California, and the little tiny slivers of what they call legal is pretty amazing.
I'll just say one really quick thing. I don't know what y'all are even talking about. I'm serious. You just did some academia-ish on me. But I will say, when I was trying to put some kind of context, y'all are talking about pickling, right? Yeah. Okay, please, family, please, let's take it out of the academia for just a second. If you were in mixed company with us live scholars, I'll speak for myself anyway, because I think that's sometimes part of the problem. And I agree with Tanya. I have some issues. I have something inside of me started to go, when we started talking about ancestors, surviving in trash. I think that actually, as someone who's very close with all nations and all generations, and we get guidance and permission from our First Nations folks before we even struck the Homefulness Project, we actually have very sacred and ceremonial ways and food ways, and they don't just come out of nothing, and they don't just come out of nowhere. So, like, again, there's those two pieces, right? Just be careful of something I call linguistic domination, and and checking our academic privilege.
I'm curious to know if there's any work in equitable economic development, and that's very academic, but basically putting the ownership of production in the hands of workers, and if there's any intersection with food for any of you.
The question concerned putting production into the hands of eaters, I suppose. Thank you. Okay. Okay.
We do.
You can elaborate.
Do you want to? I got something. Okay. All right. Yeah, so one of the things when we started the Poor People Garden, again, we're really transparent about talking all the time about poverty and race, just because we're a multi-nation, multi-generation group of folks from all colors. Our connection is around poverty. And that comes in many different ways, right? Colonization and race all plays in. So all that to say, there's this whole sort of unspoken thing. Oftentimes, that's another thing I wanted to talk about, so I'm glad you brought it up. When you talk about food justice, that also feels like the Birkenstock folk you brought up. It feels like what I call the cult of volunteerism. It feels like privilege. And we hit that straight, like, head on when we started Homefulness and we started our Poor People Gardens, because guess what? That compost costs money, and all those tools and all that ish. Yeah, we got a lot of stuff donated, but at the end of the day, like, to get the real good seeds that weren't GMO and weren't sold and blah, 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 it costed money, number one. Number two, time is everything for folks in struggle, for poverty scholars, for mamas barely surviving, and for migrante warriors who are part of our family. We have a Voces de Migrantes en Resistencia. I do not speak for some. I have that paper privilege, even though as a welfare queen, sometimes it feels like I'm not part of this AmeriClan system. But another topic. That said, we knew really clearly, because it had already been the way we operated, that money was important, right? Or what I affectionately call bloodstained dollars. So to actually work those gardens, we had to pay fellow poverty scholars for their hourly rate. We didn't expect people to do that for free, and we talked about it as being a form of shared equity, which goes back to the thing I brought up a few minutes ago, in terms of y'all, in terms of working outside of the institution. Don't expect and don't rely only on the cult of volunteerism, the folks that have that access and privilege. Turn that work into a paid job, a living wage paid job. Matter of fact, go back to equity shares so that those gardens then become people's in the communities that they tend, it's their equity, right? So we've done a thing where we actually turn those into forms of equity, and that people can do whatever they want to with them, and ultimately as well, benefit. So we're talking about micro business. We're going to be doing our poor people's farm, our farmers market, so that everybody who works sells their stuff, makes that into an economy, and then we can take one less effed up job that day. We can take one less struggle off of our plate as poor folks.
Y'all want to know another euphemism that I absolutely cannot stand? Give a man a fish, he eats for a day. Teach him how to fish, he eats for a lifetime. Capitalist society, that's some bullshit. That's not true. Because does that man have access to a boat? Is there a monopoly on the lake he's gonna fish out of? Can he process the fish somewhere? Can he get access to the market to go sell that fish? Like, is it cheaper for his family to get the fish from somebody else? Like, all these, I have questions that need answers about these fishes. So I think about that a lot when I'm thinking about production. So for us, like I said, I had that eureka moment when I was doing the Mommy and Me class, which I started when I was like 25, 26 years old, over 11 years ago. And just because I wanted to do something and I had children, I wanted to create a safe space for women of color and children of color in the community. And then I realized, in order for this to be, I know there was a question about sustainability, I wish we had gotten to that. In order for this to be sustainable, because there's so much broadness in that, because we can talk about sustainable food, we can talk about eating sustainable, we can talk about sustainable production, but what about sustainable on a broad level in terms of just life and living? It wasn't sustainable without some sort of economic strategy attached to that. And we had to think about production, right? We're thinking about, so I went to business school, and when I started doing this work, while everyone else saw the Bronx, I was pushed into the Bronx from Harlem by way of gentrification. So I always say that, I'm from Harlem, but I live in the Bronx, and the Bronx raised me by way of gentrified Harlem. I think often about when I got there, all of these empty lots and dilapidated buildings and all of the things that we think about when we think about the Bronx, right? And a lot of people saw that as a deficit. And me being in business school, I was like, nah, this is a market opportunity. And I think back now, and I'm still in conflict with myself around what it looks like to navigate a capitalist system, want to see it deconstructed, but also have to exist in it. That's what capitalism does. It forces you to participate in order to thrive. I am very much like Tiny. As a woman who is a mother who is also working with other mothers, I do not have the literal privilege of saying to people that we can do these things for free. I cannot talk about democratic socialism and putting the onus on people to buck up, have a small footprint, all of these other things that they didn't even create, right? And they are already like marginalized. My dad always says there's no such thing as a free lunch. Even if you ate it for free, somebody had to pay for it somewhere. That's what production looks like. So for us, our model, when I first started doing this, and I really leaned on this business school education that I was getting at Baruch, was to think about, what's my model? My model is a vertically integrated one. So we are thinking about how we look at food literally from production to waste, right? We haven't gotten there yet. We're still trying to just figure out the small piece of production first, and then entry into the market. The one thing that we do want, that we are realizing, is that while we're producing food at the farm, and we have chickens, so we sell their eggs, we're working with apiaries in the Finger Lakes section of, we're buying from, not really working with them. That's kind of disingenuous. But then we're looking at, so when I first started this, I realized that this 5,400 square foot lot was not nearly going to look at scale. If I was lucky, 10 families could come in, pick some stuff. We could have a real kumbaya moment like, oh, look, I'm eating this pear that I got from, my backyard. But in terms of actually feeding folks, this wasn't going to do it. So we had to start looking at how do we aggregate. Part of the thing that I'm tasked with in doing this too is also making sure that we educate people in the community around what business models look like. So often, many of my social justice warrior friends come in, like Tanya was saying, talk, we have all these lofty ideas. It's like, yeah, fuck the man, burn it down, and they don't know shit about how stuff actually works. And so if we're gonna look at changing our community, while I struggle with what Adri Lord said, which is that we cannot use the master's tools to deconstruct, we can't use the master's tools of oppression to build a new house. We certainly have to know what those tools look like and how they work, right? And we have to then think about what tools actually are accessible to us, which tools we need to get access to, and then figure out how we're gonna build our own house. So we're aggregating from New York State farmers, and so that way we're also supporting New York State farmers, and we're going through something called Grow NYC, which runs the largest farmers market network in New York City. We're growing on our own, and now we're looking at how do we actually get access to. This is also the legality. So when we're dealing with food, you have to think about licenses and permits and all of this other hellish stuff that actually works to keep people out. Because food is not academic. It's not, it's really not like that, above most people's heads, right? But in order for a certain minority to profit, well, then you've got to, create all of these other ways in order to keep people out. And so, that's a whole other conversation that probably should involve a joint and tequila. But in any event, so we're looking at the permitting process. We're looking at commercial kitchens. There aren't that many in New York City that are open to the public. Now I'm looking at how do I get capital dollars from the municipality to create a commercial kitchen in our community board that we can be using, because we run a market and we can sell whole foods at that market. But as soon as I slice an apple and put it in a clamshell, it is considered processed. And that takes a whole nother permit. And if I do those things, because when we first started the South Bronx Mobile Market and we were going around giving food away to the community and taking donations, the health department, which had previously not been helpful, we made the New York Times in February of 2014. It was great. All my friends would call me like, girl, you made the big time, you in the New York Times. And then all of a sudden, James Middleton was on the phone, was like, hello, this is James Middleton, the director of the New York City Department of Health and Mental Hygiene. I was like, oh, how you doing? He's like, so congratulations on your New York Times article, but I'm looking here in the system. What's your permit name under? I'm like, boy, stop playing. You know I ain't got no permit. And so I'm not really selling food. I'm giving it away and people are giving donations. He was like, haha, girl, come on into the office, let's talk. Right? And so we have to think about those things as well. So now we're trying to navigate that system and also get access to, so there are barriers that can keep people out. And so we are trying to think about ways in which, one, we can have access to those that already exist, and then if and when appropriate, how do we create our own? And that's where it gets really sticky for people. So you see a lot of people showing up into this space as makers and creators, but they're not producers. And there is a difference, because becoming a producer is very difficult, but we're constantly trying to figure out how do we get to that point. And it can be laborious, and it can be expensive, and it takes time, and it can be difficult to navigate. But I absolutely believe for many of us in this community who want to open worker-owned cooperatives, who want to make sure that people in our communities are producers, that it's absolutely worth doing. And then from there, we also wanted to think about creating our own markets. Mama Tanya's Kitchen has I started doing canning with the women at the farm, just out of waste. And that's what I was calling it. So language is important. I remember one of the elders being like, I'm from down south, this wasn't waste. If you didn't can what surplus you had, then you didn't eat during the winter. And so that's when I was like, ooh, I guess she checked me, trying to make sure my edges were still there, and just thinking about how I use language. And I started doing canning as well. And from there, I started selling them as a fundraising piece for the farm. And then other women started helping me, and now we have That's Mama's Jam and Nut Butter line, right? That's Mama's jam. So we do mainly just apples because in New York State, apples are prolific and you can get apples almost year round. And so we do three different types of jam. We do a boozy applesauce, we do a bourbon apple lemon preserve, and then we do a honey basil jam. And now we are thinking about how do we ratchet that up so that we can turn that into a worker-owned cooperative and have women from the community producing those things. But it's just not enough for me to just say they're going to produce it. How do we also like create a commercial kitchen that we have control over? And so I think that's important. And then from there, we want to think about composting. That's really important too. We as a globally, thinking about climate change, which is where I started my work, we need to be thinking about how do we get as close as possible to zero waste. Like we throw it away, it's gone, we don't think about it. But it is here, and it is having tremendous effects on the world in which we live. You know, like we're not seeing a winter in New York now, you know, or it's coming later, you know, and lasting a short time longer, and all of the global effects. So how do we, in doing food, which can be tremendously wasteful, how do we then also mitigate some of that by making sure that, and so there are some opportunities that we're looking at for young people who are chronically underemployed in our community and do need to be bringing income into their residences, in order to survive. How do we create some business opportunities for young people to be doing composting? So it's this vertically integrated model that we hope that we'll be successful in.
We are out of time, so I want to invite all of you, as I thank you for joining us for the last 2 hours, to join me in thanking our panelists for sharing their stories, their strength, and their expertise. It has been my privilege to listen to you. Thank you. We in the academy.
Can I do one shout out? Because the youth at Decolonize Academy will be really mad at me. So when I told them we were coming to this, they put out a newspaper, youth-led, all nations, all generations, because we make media. It's called Decolon News. And they did an issue called War on Our People, War on Our Bodies. Po food kills more poor people than guns. So again, those are also for sale. All proceeds go back to the school, which is a poor people's school. I just want to make sure I'd said it. Sorry.
Not at all. Thank you. I think you should set yourself up next to the open bar, which will be selling previously paid for or distributing previously paid for soft drinks and wine and beer for the next hour. And there's all kinds of bougie-ass food available for you outside those doors. Please eat it all. We don't want to take any home. Thank you so much.